Good morning, everyone. Is volume okay? We're getting there. Good. It's great to be here. I wanted to extend my thanks to Randy and the church here for hosting us. There's a lot that the hotel does, and there's an awful lot that the hotel does not do. And no knock on them, but just appreciate all the work that went into making this possible. While you're buckling your seatbelts and putting on your chin straps, because I'm going to be coming at you hard this morning, I wanted to, if you permit me, a 15-second advertisement. Our church up in Arlington is looking for an associate pastor, and I couldn't think of a better group to sort of network with. So if you know of any people that you think might be interested in talking with me about that, please let me know. I also want to encourage us while we're together in these days to draw near to God. It's great to be together. That's one of the things that we all look forward to. But I want to encourage us in the midst of catching up and having fun and just swapping stories and all that great stuff that we do, that we not forget to draw near to God. If all we do is draw near to one another, there's not a lot of seed in that. Father is the one who's got the seed. So I'm not talking about having religious conversations or any silly stuff like that, but just want to remind us to draw near to God together. Now I want to start with a little bit of a history question for you. I want you to think of where we are in history. I want to read you a quote from a prominent Christian leader and ask you when in history you think it might have been spoken. Here's the quote. Is a Christian leader. I expect to die in my bed. I expect my successor will die in prison. I expect his successor will die a martyr in the town square. And his successor will pick up the shards of a ruined society and slowly help rebuild civilization. When does that sound like to you? What's a time in history? Yeah. Yeah, it's actually Cardinal Francis George, the Catholic Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, who said that in the year 2010. I expect to die in my bed. I expect my successor to die in prison. I expect his successor to die a martyr in the square. And I expect his successor to pick up the shards of a ruined society and slowly begin to rebuild civilization as the church has done so often in its history. So I want to talk about sowing in a shattered society. Sowing in a shattered society. Our society doesn't feel much shattered to us, but every society is shattered in its own unique ways. And I want us to think about a word that we love so much and have really given our lives in as many ways as we possibly could have to walking out this word discipleship. And I want you to think about discipleship as a centering process. The seeds I want to sow in what I want to present this morning are seeds of eccentricity. I want us to become more eccentric. And I'm really hoping that what I lay out for us this morning will stimulate some conversations back home. And I think you'll see what I'm getting at as I have a chance to unpack this morning. We think of the word eccentric as meaning odd or off-center. Nobody really wants to be eccentric. But the word eccentric means having a different center. We need to learn what that really looks like in the world that we live in to be centered differently. Another word I want to give you is focus. Again, from the Latin root of our word focus means hearth. H-E-A-R-T-H, hearth. The hearth is the place in a household that gathers, centers, nourishes, protects, communicates identity to the people who gather around that hearth. Where are the hearths in your home? Where are the hearths in our Christian communities? Where are the places of safety, nourishment, refreshment, focus that will help us not talk eccentrically, but actually live eccentrically? Our culture, every culture, is extremely good at focusing us, centering us on the wrong things. Think of all the ways that the culture we live in relentlessly says to us, come here and be nourished. Gather around this and be fed. This will communicate to you who you really are and what your life is actually for. Culture's good at that. And how many of you feel too busy? The word we use is time poor. Isn't that an interesting concept, to be time poor? Doesn't everybody get 168 hours every week? But we feel time poor. And one of the things I'm wanting us to think about is, how can we learn? First, are we willing to do less in order to be more? Are we willing to learn how to do less in order to become, or in order to be, more? That's a seed thought. Take that home and unpack that a bit. I want us to think this morning a little bit about the book of Daniel. That book that even people who aren't Bible readers know about: feet of clay, fiery furnaces, handwriting on the wall. And I think we often read, and to some extent even misread, the book of Daniel. We think of it as a prophetic book. Daniel with his visions of these beasts that arise and king's dreams, and it's a book about predicting the future. Or we think, certainly that's an aspect of the book of Daniel, we also might think of it as just an amazing character study. Daniel and his three friends, they're awesome. I dare to be a Daniel. But what do? What makes Daniel Daniel? How did he get that way? The book of Daniel doesn't actually explain that to us. But what the book of Daniel is actually about, I think, is how do the people of God serve the Lord faithfully in the midst of empire? Our Bible is a book that is written in the shadow of empire. Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Americans. We live in an empire. It's part of human history. Empires, like all human things, are mixed bags. There's some things empires do really well. Paul, the apostle, was very grateful for Roman roads because they enabled the gospel to go throughout the Roman Empire. They also enable the Roman soldiers to march wherever the emperor wants them to go. How do we be faithful to God in the midst of empire? Those of you who are pastoral leaders in your communities, I want to commend to you the book of Daniel as a book of tremendous pastoral wisdom for how do you disciple people to be eccentric in the face of empire. How is it that Daniel and his 3 friends are the king of Babylon judges them to be 10 times better than all the Babylonians? And what are they 10 times better at? Do you remember from Daniel 1? The king finds them 10 times better at the language and learning of the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't question them about the 10 Commandments, the kings of Israel, the history of the covenant. But he finds Daniel and these 3 young men, probably at the age of 12, 13, 14, 10 times better than the natives at understanding Babylon. How do they do that? How does Daniel know how to interpret the nightmares of the culture? Is our culture having nightmares? Yeah, they're called movies. Many of our movies are simply our nightmares, our empire's nightmares on a screen. Not every movie is that way, but a lot of them are. King has a dream. The king representing the empire. The empire is having a dream that troubles it, doesn't understand. Needs somebody to interpret its dreams for it. How do you become that kind of person? How do you know how to stand up when everybody's bowing down? How do you learn how to speak truth to power? How do we learn how to comprehend the writing that everybody can see but nobody can read? Nobody can comprehend. They see the letters, but they can't read. But Daniel can. How do we become an eccentric people, a people who have a different center in a way that enables us to minister to a nightmare-plagued empire? There's something about God's people and emperors having nightmares. When Jesus is before Pilate, what does Pilate's wife say? She sends him a message. Have nothing to do with that righteous man. I had a bad dream about him. The first thing that happens in the book of Daniel, after Daniel and his friends are judged by the king to be 10 times better at the language and literature of the Babylonians, and they enter the king's service, the next thing that happens, king has a nightmare. Are we willing to become a people who, in a sense, give nightmares to our empire and then know how to interpret the dreams that God sends? God sends the dream. How do we learn how to face the beasts that prowl our world and see them brought into obedience to the Lord who created them? So I want to do a little bit of a case study with us this morning. I want to think about our empire just a little bit. And again, when I say that we live in an empire, I am not saying that the President of the United States is Caesar Augustus. I'm not making one-to-one comparisons between Rome or Egypt. I'm just saying you live in an empire. And if I can borrow some of Daniel's thinking, Daniel, who tends to see things in beast images, as it were, I want to give you an image of a snake. I want you to think of the empire you live in as sort of like a snake, but it's a constrictor. It's not a venomous snake. And what it does is it wraps its coils all around you so that the only thing you're able to see is the glittering scales of the snake that's about to eat you. But it's so beautiful. The scales are so beautiful. They seem so protective. What can get at you when you're inside those coils?